Welcome to C Club's podcast. My name is Jess, and today I'm joined by an old friend of C Club, longtime contributor and supporter, Ian Lee. Ian is one of the co-founders at Syndicate Protocol. We have a fun conversation that dives into Syndicate, the tool that Ian and his team have been building over the last few months. We talk about their most recent rollout, which was on-chain investment clubs, which I think can really unlock a lot of value for some of the communities that we are seeing evolving in the C Club ecosystem and beyond. And maybe my more interesting point here is diving into the bigger picture implications around Web3 Social that Ian has been excited about for a number of years now. He's been a fun conversation partner on this topic and an early supporter of C Club, and I think you'll enjoy our conversation here. Well, let's just jump into it. Ian, welcome to Club.
Thanks for having me, dude. It's always good to hang out with you. It's actually just like, talking to a friend. So I'm looking forward to just doing that for however long you'll have me.
Yeah, well, I was reflecting on this and we were talking a little bit before we hit record. Probably some of my earliest conversations as we started to form C Club, and you're one of our earliest supporters in many different ways. And so I was just thinking back to the number of conversations we had kind of in and around this interaction of social and networks, and even just to think of like the new language and focus that's sort of emerged over the last year and a half since we've sort of been jamming in different things. It's super cool. And I think so much has happened in your world too. And I think since we first met, you've sort of made a big shift and jumped back into founding and sort of building one of the very impactful potentially project here in the space. And so I want to dive into Syndicate Protocol. I know there's an announcement that you will have just made. We're recording this prior to the announcement, but you will have just made that I think is going to unlock a lot of really interesting momentum for DAOs that I would love to get into. And I'm hoping we can also sort of touch on some of like the bigger picture things that you're excited about. And I always feel like our conversations are about trying to like sense make on the edges a little bit, and the language is kind of always still developing. So we're going to get into those conversations. That's going to happen. Why don't we just kick it off right now? Tell us what Syndicate Protocol is and what you're working on there.
Well, if you'll entertain me for 1 second, I just want to say that, first of all, I learned as much from you and the C Club community as the way I give back. That's why I actually love talking with you, Jess, because I always come away with something new. So I'm sure I'm going to come away with something really awesome this time around. The other thing I just want to say is I have been looking into Web3 Social for many, many years, and that's actually a big part of how Syndicate even came about. But I remember when you were thinking about Seed Club and you were talking about this thing that you were doing, and I was at IDEO full-time focused on investing at the time, and I remember going back to the IDEO team and saying, hey, I don't know what this thing is, but it's going to be a thing. And they're like, well, what's the thesis here? And I'm like, I have no idea, but we just need to do it. And then, the rest is history. But Seed Club is incredible. You were just telling me about cohort 4 and how incredible that is. And, honestly, I had no idea. I'm sure you did, but I certainly didn't. But it's crazy. It's crazy what's happening in Web3 and social. And it's just the beginning, actually. So hopefully Syndicate's part of that. C Club is for sure one of the pioneers in that. And I'm so excited for the next few years because I think that Web3 Social is really going to have it's going to be time for it.
Yeah, I love that you told me that story as IDEO contributed to the original founding of the DAO, which I think is just the perfect sense of I don't know what this is, but there's something here. And I think, I still have that sense. I think there's something here. There's always that next sort of level, which is, I think, actually where most of our conversations kind of come together more recently. So what is that sense of where Syndicate DAO or Syndicate Protocol plays in this? What are you guys working on? How are you describing that today? Because you guys have captured an immense amount of attention and big announcement and big fundraise and big vision. And I'm curious how you guys are talking about that right now.
Well, there's a lot of different ways to talk about it, I think. I guess the inspiration was that Will and I, who I think Will has actually been on this podcast a couple times now with all the different things going on with the loot and then Constitution DAO and stuff. So
the most appearances on Club Podcast out of anybody so far is Will, and he still holds that.
Rightfully so. Yeah, he's a gigabrain to say the least. But Will and I met 4 years ago when we were both at IDEO, and in 2018 we were researching social networks in a decentralized way, and so one of the things that we were working on was the design of a pseudonymous decentralized social network and what the applications of that would be if that thing were to emerge. And there were two learnings. If you think about the context of that, right? Like it was right after ICOs, which was very early, and it was also well before DeFi. So there wasn't like a ton kind of like there like there is today to really build on top of. And so there were two critical insights from that 4 years ago. The first was that one of the primary applications for a decentralized social network is for the purpose of decentralized investing and democratizing investing at scale across these blockchain networks and across the internet. And so we looked at that in 2018, and Will and I were like, that's interesting. I wonder what you could do with that. The second insight, though, which was really critical, was that the market was not ready for that, actually, because there were a number of things at the infrastructure level that were required in order for that idea to actually work. And so we realized that we came to that conclusion in the middle of 2018 or something like that. And we sort of said, okay, well, let's wait on it. And so he went actually into the digital identity space, and I went into, continued to invest with IDEO and worked with a lot of like DeFi startups from 2019 to 2020, and obviously like things in Web3 Social and NFTs and stuff like that. It was around 2020 where it started, a lot of the infrastructure had been put in place by like all these other great teams in the DeFi space and others. And we started looking at it again and sort of saying, okay, wait a minute, if you took a couple of these primitives that had been built by other teams and mashed them together, and then you actually mashed that with some of the work that we had done around the social networking piece, now Syndicate can actually, or something like Syndicate can actually exist. So we started working on that, working through the architecture of it for a number of months. And it was in late 2020 where we were like, okay, this is actually possible. Like we can actually bring this kind of decentralized investing protocol and social network into the world. And that's when we decided to formally create a company and then go after it in early 2021. But I think like the why behind this is that, if again, going all the way back to 2018, right after the ICO wave, there was a lot of criticism around ICOs back then that this thing was all a scam and it was all going to go away. And what you saw back then from 2017 to 2018 was the pendulum really dramatically shift from ICOs to SAFT, right? SAFT models. And I always kind of was bothered by that, because when you look at the ICO model, as imperfect as it was, right, it was truly democratized investing in the most like permissionless, decentralized and accessible way possible. Now, obviously, like that wasn't great from a securities regs perspective or like an investor protection perspective, but in terms of the intent of, at least some of the intent of it, I actually thought that like that was sort of directionally correct in terms of addressing a lot of these issues around inequality of access and inequality of investing and opportunity and being a part of kind of investing and developing these technologies and the resulting kind of wealth that is built from that those kind of opportunities should be available to as many people as possible, because otherwise this technology will just centralize wealth even further, right? And so that kind of always irked me over the years, that crypto, which is this democratizing, empowering, decentralized technology, the capital that's investing it is still quite centralized. And I always believed that there would be a more community-driven, network-native model for investing in Web3 in these technologies that are fundamentally community-owned and network-native, right? So that is kind of the spirit behind Syndicate, which is we want to bring to market and to the world decentralized infrastructure and community-driven infrastructure for natively investing in Web3 in the way that it was always intended to be, I think. We believe that as part of that, the fundamental primitive for investing into Web3 natively is the DAO architecture. And so if you look at the infrastructure and the platform and the protocols that we're building, it is arguably a DAO infrastructure for the purpose of investing natively in Web3 projects, people, communities, etc.
Yeah, I flashbacks to 2017, and I think yeah, there's a lot of like lessons to take from that for sure. And also I think if you were on the outside of that looking in, it was probably very easy to miss the big innovation that was happening there. And I think trying to be reinvented a number of times, whether that's through fair launches or through yield farming or yada yada. And yeah, I think it's so interesting to see the narrative again. It's almost like this convergent, divergent narrative around investing. Like right now, the narrative is big VCs coming in, owning majority of rounds. There being a number of like blockers to individuals participating. And I think it's also why so many people are, as you sort of hinted at, like leaning into DAOs or sort of forming capital in smaller ways. And interesting to sort of see that narrative play out over the past few years and where it will go over the next little while. I think the thing that I always find interesting is this sort of framing of what you're building at Syndicate, and then even more broadly what's happening in the DAO space as a social network. And I think this idea of tokens being a Schelling point or playing a major role in that social network is very interesting to me. I think within Web2 networks, maybe the like, the follow, the subscribe, I think owning tokens is sort of like a step above that, a more meta layer of association. And yet how that ultimately plays out and how these things work together, like there's still, that's where things get fuzzy, and we haven't really seen that happen on a technology level or on a platform level. It's definitely happening on a social level, but again, hard to kind of place. So I'm curious if you could maybe just pull apart a little bit more, like what is your latest thinking on how you're framing Syndicate as sort of like almost like Web3 social? That's what I hear in a lot of what you're saying. And yet maybe one other way of looking at it is saying, well, these are on-chain Syndicate SPVs, essentially. How do you sort of see those two things playing together?
Yeah. And by the way, like I would love to get your latest take on from the C Club perspective on how you're thinking about Web3 social, because I'm sure you're seeing things from a different angle too. I guess like our latest thinking here is that Web3 enables people to create on-chain social graphs. And on-chain social graphs are in Web3 going to be global, open, decentralized, tokenized, and composable. And when you actually think about like all of those components or characteristics social graph looks like in Web3 as compared to Web2, there are some similarities, but they look very different. In particular, one key difference is that social graphs in Web2 are fairly verticalized, application specific, and they're very like fat in terms of like what's in them. They're also obviously like closed gardens. And so like, there's walls around them, right? But they're kind of like verticalized. But in Web3, I think that Web3 social graphs are going to be thin, sort of horizontal layers that are composable with each other. And social graphs that are composable with each other and can actually stack on top of each other is a really interesting design that is going to unlock things like applications, experiences, businesses, services, whatever, on top of them that you just would never see in Web 2. And so kind of like high level, that's been our thinking there. As far as like how Syndicate plays into that, right? Like, so one of the ways to answer that, I think, is like, what are DAOs actually? And there's been like, kind of like NFTs and even like the word crypto and the word blockchains, like over even Bitcoin, frankly, over the years have evolved in terms of like how people look at it and how people think about it. I think DAOs are sort of going through that evolution actually in terms of like what they are and how to think about them. And the way that I like to frame DAOs are actually as social financial technology, which more efficiently, more easily coordinates human beings and financial capital on the internet natively, really, really seamlessly. And when you look at it that way, right, it's really interesting because what that means actually is that DAO technologies, for the most part, unless you're talking about like ones that are just like the fully decentralized, fully autonomous kind of framing of a DAO, that actually implies that most DAO technologies are inherently social. So one of the interesting things when you think about like, for example, DeFi, is that one of the biggest innovations of DeFi was the AMM model, from Uniswap, namely, and this like kind of person to contract model where it's actually like it's a marketplace, but it's actually like a one player mode marketplace, which is a crazy innovation with no order book, right? But it's like one person to a single contract, right? DAOs are not really like that. I mean, they're actually multiplayer kind of. It's a multiplayer technology, multiplayer mode, and because, in my opinion, it's a multiplayer technology, one of the exhausts, I guess, or outputs, whether primary or secondary from DAO technology or DAOs, is actually social graphs and social networks. And I think that is very much kind of a part of how we're thinking about Syndicate, which is, we're creating this tool for people to invest in DAOs and invest together on the internet natively, right? In addition to that, these DAOs on Syndicate and other DAOs out there, like they start outputting a social network around that. And it's actually around that there becomes like some really, really crazy and interesting possibilities.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and I'd love to dive into some of those possibilities. But I think there's something important in that. And I don't think I even really look at like what we're doing at C Club. I would never call it like a social network, though. I think without a doubt, the core value that's being created here is this idea of amazing projects, amazing people coming together, and us building this network of human beings. But I think one of the things that we kind of learned early on was that trying to, or at least believed, is that trying to like design mechanisms that incentivize micro actions, or like, I guess manipulate is probably too strong of a word, but get people to do certain things based on rewards or these designing microeconomies is just not going to work. And instead, really what's happening is the freedom that comes from like a DAO governance token being the coordination mechanism and the incentive mechanism kind of creates this wide parameter set for all sorts of human interactions to happen. And I think that has led to like the lack of DAOs being DAOs in a sense, right? Where that they're maybe Bitcoin being like the ultimate DAO, or it's massively decentralized and it's purely an incentive network that's driving it. And sure, there's social coordination, but the core is the protocol. This is sort of allowed for a much broader type of value to be created. But what I hadn't connected it to, which I think you've just done, is saying like, okay, well, where is like the data that comes out of it, the sort of mix of interaction that happens within that wide parameter set actually might be really useful input to maybe some more meta structures that start to emerge. And I think that's super interesting. And I'm wondering, does this tie into reputation? Is there something, I'm curious, how do you see that sort of playing out?
Yeah, I mean, and this actually, again, goes all the way back to Will and my's research 4 years ago, but we were really fascinated in this idea of decentralized social networks around this potential for on-chain social graphs to prioritize in Web3 actions over words. For example, Web2 is all about attention and what you say online, right? And the cost of those words are actually like free. I mean, there's social costs, but like you can say whatever you want and pretend to be whoever you want. But in an on-chain world, especially like what we were kind of conceiving back then, which is this pseudonymous decentralized social network, the only thing that matters, or one of the only thing that matters, at least initially in those networks, is what you've actually done. And it's provable on chain. And so this idea of social networks in a Web3 native context, which I don't think are going to be like, for example, like a Web3 version of Facebook or LinkedIn. It's not going to look like that. But this idea that social networks in Web3 value and prioritize actions over words or behaviors over words and stuff like that is profound, potentially, we think. And so pulling on that thread, like if you were building an application or an experience or something on top of a social network where that social network could reward people for what they did, not what they said, like it starts to open up new design possibilities beyond just investing like what Syndicate is doing, but other areas too, which is, I think, really exciting to think about.
Yeah, I think what's sort of shaped my thinking a lot on that recently is just the role that these DAOs, say like Friends with Benefits, we had Alex Zhang on last week, and they're talking about their sort of evolving NFT metadata reputation thing. We're seeing some interesting projects bubble up within the C Club world that are using sort of NFTs and experience or reputation as kind of this new trying to capture more of an intrinsic, I guess, recognizing or maybe driving more intrinsic motivation or recognizing almost like a two token model type thing, but in a very new way, which I think is exciting because the importance of these entities or brands or social clubs or communities or DAOs bringing relevancy to that data. And I think like the other example I would say is like reputation within, say, assume within a syndicate protocol world is like, okay, well, maybe I can actually prove through my actions on-chain assets that I am accredited, and that there's a sense of reputation that's associated in there. And then maybe even better, I can actually, as if you're a fund, you can prove to a project that you are a good actor and you hold tokens. Like there's all these things that you can start to do. So I always sort of had like, I felt like I was stuck in the middle of like, where does this become real? And I think there's a sense of it becoming, those two worlds may be coming together, but reputation means something within C Club, reputation means something within FWB. It means less as those two things as you sort of step out of it and try to cross-pollinate, though there's probably some value there. And then again, it means a lot when it comes down to specific utilities. Yeah, I think it's been cool to sort of start to explore that and see projects really lean into that.
I mean, Seed Club is a perfect example in FWB where, I mean, you know this better than I do, like, your communities, Seed Club and FWB specifically, but like other ones too out there, they're already kind of collaborating, coordinating together, jamming on stuff together. This idea of composable communities or composable social networks is already happening at the human level. It just hasn't been the tools and the infrastructure and the interfaces to, I think, recognize those interactions and collaborations haven't fully happened on chain. I mean, you do see cool things like Coordinate and some other tools out there that are starting to kind of like poke at some of that, but it may take some time. But like, I do think that in the next couple of years, that will just be a thing. Once that is a thing, like once that infrastructure is in place, kind of like, with Syndicate, like it took a few years for DeFi to get in place before something like Syndicate could exist. I think it's going to be similar, which is like a couple of years from now when this Web3 social stuff is in place, then these new applications and things become possible on top of that, which is going to be really exciting.
So maybe let's shift gears here a little bit, because as of today, when you were listening to this, you would have had an announcement that has come out introducing, well, what I can only imagine is kind of been like we've been in and around the sort of product development within Syndicate for a while and have had the pleasure of sort of seeing what you guys have been working on there. But this idea of on-chain investment clubs, and what is this sort of Syndicate announcement that you're announcing next week, but also yesterday, depending on when you're listening to this. And I would love to get into some of the implications because I think it kind of ties together a lot of what we've been talking about today.
Yeah. So we're really excited because we've been working really hard on this tool on top of the Syndicate protocol. This will be our first mainstream tool on top of the protocol that we'll have launched publicly in open beta. And we've been working on this with a bunch of DAOs, Web3 communities, investors from the traditional world, the Web3 world, angel groups, friend groups even, that are like buying NFTs together or investing in startups together if they're like a group of founders or angels. For the last actually 6 months, since we've gotten the core foundational protocols of Syndicate developed and in place. And what this tool is it's called Web3 Investment Clubs on Syndicate. And it is this tool that allows any group of people to create an investing DAO as an investment club, which maybe we'll get into more deeply, and run that completely on-chain, on Syndicate protocol, on Ethereum, on the internet natively with no backend. And the implications of that we think are really profound because of a couple things. The effort, the speed, and the cost to create one of these things is, well, next to nothing. It's certainly as simple as possible, at least for Web3 standards. I mean, Web 2 people still might need to understand Web3 wallets and stuff like that. And actually, a lot of our support questions are mostly about wallets, not about Syndicate, which we're happily fielding on behalf of the wallet teams. You can spin up an investing DAO and transform any Ethereum wallet, whether it's a multi-sig or a Ledger or a MetaMask, into a powerful investing DAO using our protocol. And so groups of friends, a lot of these people that are using it are often like groups of friends that have been co-investing together for years and they know each other. and they have like a group chat on Telegram or a channel in Discord or something like that. And it basically allows them to turn that group chat into an investing DAO, which if you think about what's happening today, right, a lot of these people, they're already doing that. They're actually like throwing into a Gnosis safe or someone's wallet, and they're just saying like, cool, let's do this together. Let's buy this NFT together. But oh, by the way, let's like manually track all this stuff on a Google spreadsheet offline, and someone has to like go through all the spreadsheets and like keep that updated, and which is frankly kind of just a pain. And so what we've done here is like created this really simple user experience that allows people to create it, manage the investing DAO completely on Syndicate. So it has this dashboard that shows in real time what tokens, what NFTs, and also even what startups, if you're investing in off-chain assets, there are. And then in addition to all of that, there's like things like, Balaji wrote about this concept of a mirror table, mirror shares. Like we've implemented that as part of the DAO. So it basically manages the DAO's cap table in real time. It's based on ERC20 infrastructures. So it allows these DAOs to utilize other great Web3 tools, whether it's for governance or coordination, like, Snapshot or Coordinate or whatever. And then also, one of the things that we think is really important is that in order for DAOs to really go mainstream, there are a lot of people who want to utilize DAO or in our opinion, want to utilize DAO technology, but they want also the peace of mind that they're following things the right way and they're not unknowingly, I guess, violating any compliance or regulations. And so we are building tools and open source infrastructure that anyone can use. But with that said, if a DAO wants to kind of be by the book on behalf of their DAO and also their members to like do all the things by the book and protect themselves, we offer a number of tools and also partner services that allow them to do that. So for example, we worked with Latham Watkins, a top law firm, to create these open source documents for investment clubs on Syndicate that anyone can freely use and generate and have people sign using their web wallet, which provides them with kind of liability protections and kind of a number of things if things don't go right with the DAO. And then the other thing is we've also partnered with this fintech that we're really great friends with called Dula in the Web2 space, actually. And what Dula does is we've teamed up with them so that any DAO on Syndicate can get a legal entity in Delaware, Wyoming, or any other US state. They can do tax filings. They can get a bank account actually in the real world. And they can also issue K1s, which K1s are specific to investing entities and in our case, DAOs. So basically, like they can get, if you want, this end-to-end solution, both the Web3 native stuff from Syndicate, as well as some of these real-world tools to help maintain compliance if that's relevant for that group. Taking a big step back, as I was mentioning around the motivations behind Syndicate, which is around taking these tools for investing that forever have been really only accessible to people that could afford them. I mean, you know this, it's expensive to set up and run an investing organization or program. And because of that, because those tools are so expensive and inaccessible and difficult to use, that's actually excluding a ton of people in the world, I mean, massive numbers of people in the world from investing in and being a part of building the world and investing in these technologies that are creating the world that everyone lives in. And so we're really excited about this tool for that reason, because it's now empowering communities with these tools that we've built in a Web3 native way to be able to invest together in the things that they care about most. So part of this announcement, right, like more than half of the groups that we've been incubating this with and were announced as launch partners or launch users, right, more than half of them are women-led or all women DAOs. And what they're doing is bringing more women into the Web3 space to invest and build in Web3. We also have like this DAO called Maury Music DAO, which is this group of creatives that are launching an investing DAO to invest in more musicians in the music NFT space. And like, there's all these just communities that I think need this tool and now can basically like utilize this to invest in their own communities and the development of their communities. And that's what we're most excited about. Obviously, that's just our first product. We've got a lot of things like already in development that we'll be releasing in the coming months. But we're excited about this start here and what it could mean for DAOs as technology in terms of going more mainstream, but more broadly, just like the Web3 space and living up to the promise of, empowering and democratizing these tools that everyone deserves to have.
Yeah, I think there might be some people listening here who the sort of the nuance between what you're trying to do here and what, say, other DAOs that are maybe more YOLO DAOs that have been spun up are actually getting at. And I think it's an important sort of thing maybe to dive into. And the core insight or opportunity that you're really building tools around is saying that, hey, there is this legal entity, or at least a recognized structure that is an investment club that allows for groups of people to come together to pool some capital, to make decisions together, and to invest in assets or in opportunities together. And while that might sound like a DAO, when we're talking about, say, projects that come through C Club, or you talk about DAOs more generally, or as C Club wants to think about how do we actually invest capital and get returns and be able to pay out returns, the DAO structure as it sits doesn't really allow for that, right? Especially if you're thinking, or at least it's more challenging and there's more question marks around it. So if you're going to go specifically out to build like a venture DAO, and you're going to take people's money and a group of people are going to invest it, and there's going to be returns, it's going to be tough to do that without some formal legal structure. And the most successful, or I guess like the leading organizations there have done this well, right? So this is what the Tribute Labs guys are doing with Allow and Flamingo DAO. It's like a corporation that has members and it reports and it's returning, stuff like that. Or there's more traditional fund structures that are, as you write, very expensive to set up, or there's sort of like ones that are in between, but they're all sort of recognizing there needs to be a legal entity. This idea of like investment clubs has always sort of been floating around as one really great option to sort of formalize relationships and to sort of build something that's understood by the law as it is today. And so what I'm seeing you guys do is through this product is actually give communities that have formed, that might be around NFTs or around their own social tokens or DAO tokens, a new structure that they can actually go and participate in actions that were kind of off limits or more risky for them to participate in otherwise. And so I'm curious if there's anything to add to that to make sure I've sort of captured that appropriately. Please share that. I'm really interested in how you're seeing some of these existing communities start to leverage this new tool stack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to mention that what Tribute Labs and so many others, the Moloch DAO and framework and infrastructure and all these other things that are out there doing amazing things, we're really grateful to be a part of that community. And we learn tons from them, and we hope that we contribute back to that community as much as they've given us, and are super excited about everything that they're working on. I think our approach to this is that, well, a couple things. So first of all, we want to decentralize the technologies that we are building and open source it completely. And so we are, working on that. It's going to take time to do that, but that is really important to us, mostly because of the mission and long-term intent. But that's also really important because doing so will enable people other than us to start building things on top of the technologies that we built that can do things that we can't either imagine right now, or that work for example, certain communities or even like different geographies that we don't understand as well. And so we want to get to that as quickly as we can and as thoughtfully as we can. I think in the meantime, as we're kind of continuing to develop this technology and continue to kind of decentralize it, the way that we think about a lot of the applications of DAOs, I guess, is that they're going to be, in the near term, a couple things. A little bit more like verticalized than maybe they have been historically as far as the application of DAO infrastructure, right? So we think that what we're building here is DAO infrastructure that's really optimized for investing DAOs and things that are kind of adjacent to that. And we're building kind of protocols and different tool sets that really just focus on kind of like those sets of uses and purposes. The other thing that I would say about these DAOs, at least that like kind of want to do things that are more hybrid and start to interact with people or organizations in kind of the meat space, is that I think that DAOs are going to be a little bit skeuomorphic for some period of time. And so like would, for example, like I think Syndicate and also these other projects or technologies that are being built in the DAO space just want to jump to kind of like the full decentralized Web3 native, everything's on chain world and open source, like 100%. And actually like not have to deal with kind of like regs in the real world and like legal entity structures in the real world, like 100%. But I think that like for a lot of use cases, especially ones where the DAOs or the people involved in those DAOs, they want to have some reasonable protections around it. The reality is that a lot of them will be a little bit skeuomorphic, right? They will need to have a legal structure, whether it's like a UNA, an unincorporated nonprofit association, like what, the A16Z team and Miles and others have kind of proposed out there for certain types of DAOs. Maybe some of them will need like a C Corp, an LLC, a nonprofit organization, or maybe even structure as a fund legally. But the one thing that I would say that has informed our thinking recently is that the appropriate legal structure will depend on the DAO archetype. And that I think is something that we are working on hard, is understanding the different DAO archetypes, particularly in the investing space. And based on that archetype and the purpose of that archetype and what they're trying to achieve, what the appropriate skeuomorphic legal design, if needed, is. So what I mean by that is like, for example, if you go into it with a legal entity-centric approach, you'll just wrap every single DAO with a C Corp or an LLC. But actually, if you start from the user perspective and go backwards, say, okay, who is this user? What are they trying to do? That actually might inform a different legal wrapper. Maybe in some cases it's a LLC, maybe in some cases it's a C Corp, maybe in some cases it's a fund, but there's actually many different types of funds. 3C1, 3C7, 506B, 506C, all this other weird stuff. And what we're doing for investing DAOs is trying to figure out all those variations and proposing and even designing into our product and protocol the appropriate ways to follow certain guidelines so that they can maintain compliance. And so just to kind of like summarize this, the first thing that we figured out is this investment club model, which is on the SEC website. They have very specific guidelines, less than 100 members, no public solicitation, no carried interest and performance fees. Everyone must participate in decisions. There's a couple more things. And if they follow that, which our tool is designed to basically help them follow that, then they're an investment club, and they in particular are not regulated by the SEC. Like they're just groups of people that are co-investing together. And actually, if you look at the history of investment clubs, it's really funny because these things have existed for hundreds of years, where even to this day, right, it's like people in this town go to like their local community center and they have a couple beers and they start talking about stocks and stock picking. Like that's an investment club. And so it's just not modernized for the internet, and in particular Web3. And now with these tools of Web3, that we can actually enforce governance and track votes, using governance tools and these Web3 systems, we've effectively modernized the investment club model for the internet and allowing that to run natively on the internet and invest in technologies and assets on the internet, which is Web3 and crypto, right? So yeah, that's kind of like what we did here and what we will be doing in the months and years ahead.
It sounds like a fun party, community center, a few beers, stock picking. I guess Discord's a modern version of that, and people can drink there as well. Yeah, I think there's a lot to get into, so you can start to see what Ian and team have sort of been building over the last little while. So just I think we'll put that in the show notes so you can have a look and see what's going on there. And it's an open beta, so I'm assuming people will be able to sort of apply and raise their hand and say, hey, we're interested in doing this. There'll probably be also a number of launch partners, so you can see it out in the wild. And I expect there to be a bunch more. We're coming up on the hour, and I want to shift our focus a little bit into the future. Right. So I know you guys are working on a number of different things, and sort of how I'm seeing your development happen right now is you are finding interesting teams, projects, ideas to work on that scratch an itch that I think is kind of aligned with some of the things you've already been thinking on, and you're building for and with them. And my guess is that you're informing your thesis and sort of evolving your product roadmap based on that. I'm just curious if we like look out over the next 6 months, maybe over the next year, which is, decades in crypto time. How are you seeing Syndicate evolve, or what is like the main thrust that you guys are pushing towards?
The answer to that changes with every customer that we work with. I think actually, to be honest, like that's how we'll probably figure that out, is building what different Web3 communities want and need the most. That said, though, to your point, we do have some strong opinions about where this is likely headed over the coming years. I think that there is something really big in this idea of social networks and composable social networks, and what composable social networks can enable. And so, for example, like imagine this world where different applications or different DAOs can actually look at these social networks and sort of say, hey, anyone who is a contributor in Seed Club with this kind of level of contribution or interactions, but is also a member of FWB and has contributed in these ways, now you can be invited into this, like a DAO or something like that, right? I think that's something that we're going to ultimately see more and more of. And so that's something that we are working on and starting to build with some of these communities. I think the other thing is, if we are successful really in enabling these new archetypes of DAOs to be set up and run natively in Web3, right? Investing DAOs in particular, potentially other ones in the future. I think what also becomes really interesting is that if DAOs are actually these like kind of decentralized organizations that run in Web3, whether for investing or some other purpose, right? I think something that is not talked about that much is that these organizations are actually composable themselves, meaning that organizational composability is possible as a result of DAOs. So it's not just like composable social graphs, but composable organizations. And when you think about it that way, there's all these crazy things like that seem like science fiction that start to become possible. Now, again, I want to caveat this with saying, like, I think what Will and I saw with social networks 4 years ago, there are a bunch of things that need to be put in place before this stuff that I'm referring to is possible. But we certainly feel that some of the infrastructure that we are building at Syndicate is going to enable and potentially accelerate some of those like science fiction use cases where organizations will be able to composably and programmatically coordinate on the internet autonomously or semi-autonomously, either for investing purposes or other purposes. And that's where things get really interesting and weird again in the area of DAOs. And we're here for it. And we're excited to make that come into existence, because it really does feel inevitable that that's where things are ultimately headed.
Yeah, I think you see like really low fidelity versions of this right now with, so we did the DAO 20 Awards, which got a wonderful group of contributors in. And well, they happen to be representative of many different DAOs. And so there's sort of this tie-in that we're doing with tokens, and kind of interesting things are going to emerge from that. And I think we're seeing these sort of service DAOs that are naturally plugging in to be the media department or to be the treasury management tool, and then what's interesting is out of these things, these new tools are actually emerging. So it's not just, maybe it starts off as sort of this low fidelity social interactions, and then collaboration starts to build and tools start to build, and then the network starts to be solidified. And yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how those things start to congeal, I guess, over the next little while.
Exactly. I mean, to your point, right? Like one of the groups we've been working with and launched with us is Vector DAO, which is, they consider themselves a service DAO. But what's fascinating is like multiple people at Syndicate, employees at Syndicate, are a part of Vector DAO too. And so like these lines between organizations, even at like the company level, are truly blurring. It's just not like at scale yet. But to your point, with C Club's DAO 20 and all these other things that are happening, right? It is, I believe, early signals of where this is ultimately all headed. One day, Jess, I'm going to be as much of an employee or contributor to Seed Club as I am Syndicate, and I'm all here for it. That's going to be a beautiful world.
We're working on me too. We're working on some, well, I guess we haven't really talked about this yet, but Seed Club merch. I'll leave it at that. And
alpha.
Cool stuff happening, right? But I had this vision of like, if we were going to do one t-shirt, it probably should be like staff t-shirt, and it just says staff, and pretty much anybody could wear it and should rock it, right? Because if you're a token holder within C Club, you are a part of this in some way. And I kind of had a chuckle earlier. But we'll see. I don't know. No promises that there'll be a staff shirt yet. Maybe in the future, steal this idea, do your own thing. I love that so much. Ian, we're at the top of the hour here. I love this sort of winding through social networks, well, the weird world of funds and legal structures. And I think that the important unlocks that come from that. And then again, I think just generally thinking through this, the social layer and protocols and how they come together, super interesting. I think we're going to see some pretty big evolutions in that space. We can represent ownership right now. We're not even able to really communicate effectively between those groups beyond using tools like Discord, but that's not really the level of abstraction that maybe is the most interesting. And of course, there's some interesting teams building around that. So it would be interesting to see when we check back on this a year from now. I mean, we'll see what happens. In the meantime, where can people follow you? Where can people stay up to date? What is an action that we should drive people towards here?
Well, number one, join the C Club. I 10 out of 10 recommend, even if you don't know what it is, just follow.
We're talking to our stands here. People are deep already.
Yeah, I mean, follow me I'm on Twitter at Ian Dows. Follow Syndicate DAO. Start an investment club today with your friends. Have fun, buy NFTs, or, invest in important projects in the communities that matter to you most. And yeah, just help us and help this community and help all of the other projects in this space continue to advance towards this vision of equal opportunity and equal access. And I think we'll all be better for it. So yeah, excited to be on this journey and ride with all of you.
Yeah, I love how much learning can be had, like how accessible learning is with tools like this. You could literally go spin up your own investment club, probably over the weekend, probably won't even take that long, and have a better understanding of this sort of frontier technology than most of your friends. So I encourage you to go do that. Ian, absolute pleasure to speak with you here today, and to continue these sort of fun conversations. We'll talk to you soon.
As always, Jess.
See you soon.
As always, Jess.
See you soon.